Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Friday morning, talking 8 games of Major League Baseball. Before we dive into the slate, quick reminder: if you're not already subscribed to my videos, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. Make sure you're hitting that like button if you like the recordings as well. It goes a long way to helping me produce more content and things like that. If you happen to stumble across this video, you're not already signed up to my projections and content and all that good stuff, make sure you're taking advantage of the special offers that I have available. If you're a current NBA subscriber, you get a pretty significant discount on the projections. They were fantastic yesterday, helping me hit on the pitchers that I had. I had Scherzer, Tanaka, Scherzer, Tanaka. Obviously, Scherzer didn't really take a whole lot of thought in that one, but Hyunjin, Ryu, Verlander, they definitely nailed a lot of the good pitching options and a lot of the really good stacks. The Phillies were one of the top-rated stacks. The Yankees, of course, were one of the top-rated stacks. A lot of good stuff. Javier Baez was one of the top rated hitters in the projections, which he probably was in a lot of people's, but still, got to tout what I have in front of me. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and hop into the games. The first game of the night that we are going to talk about, I don't know why it went black screen. There we go. Detroit at Toronto. This is an interesting game. We saw the Toronto Blue Jays get no hits through a very large portion of that game. We do have Matt Boyd taking on Matt Shoemaker. Boyd, a guy that I actually have interest in here today. This is a spot. He's never going to be a guy. He's not going to be a guy that projects extremely well in a lot of projection models. A lot of projection models aren't going to take into the fact that he showed a lot of positive signs towards the latter end of last season. His fastball velocity climbed. He had a 1.00 whip and averaged like 1 strikeout per inning. He has a really, really good slider. He throws it about 30% of the time. He generated 34.4% whiff rate on his slider last season. And this is a team in Toronto that we know cannot hit sliders. It was the reason why I went back and highlighted Jordan Zimmerman in the notes yesterday, because in spring training he started to work on that slider that started to really work for him. And well, we saw how that worked out for him last night or yesterday. So he is a guy, Matt Boyd, that I really think is one of the better value pitching options on the slate. It also is also worth noting he does get a lot of whiffs on his curveball as well, getting a 32% whiff rate on his curveball. He's only thrown it about 12% of the time last season. I would expect him to actually increase that a little bit throughout the season, because it is a pretty decent pitch for him. This Blue Jays projected lineup is not great. Against left-handed pitching, 22% strikeout rate, 190 ISO, .326 WOBA. This is a spot where, again, Matt Boyd, someone that I have a significant amount of interest in getting exposure to in cash and tournaments. I think I'm going to be pairing him with Garrett Cole. If you're looking at hitters from the Toronto side of things, I would focus on Randall Grichuk, Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel, Kevin Pillar, however you say it, and Roddy Tellez, who only has like 23 plate appearances against lefties dating back to last season, but he's a guy, he hits the ball really fucking hard whenever he makes contact. Unfortunately, he strikes out against lefties like 43% of the time. He may not even make the lineup. They may roll out like Anthony Alford in his spot. He'd be someone, again, not a whole lot of sample size for some of these guys against lefties, because the youth movement in Toronto is real, which means these guys are going to strike out a whole heck of a lot. On the other side, Schumacher is a guy that I actually have liked in the past. I don't know if this is a spot where I'm going to have a lot of interest in him. Schumacher's production over the past few years isn't really in line with what his indicators suggest it should be. His ERA indicators point towards a 3.50 ERA. It's not where he has been for quite a while now. He's battled injuries. He hasn't been able to throw a whole heck of a lot of innings over the past couple of years. It's worth noting his 4.94 ERA last year in 31 innings, not really in line with his indicators, not in line with what his indicators have suggested for the past couple of seasons for him. He has been a reliable strikeout arm, 20+% K rate in the majors, career home run. He has struggled against right-handed hitters, a 1.37 home run per 9 innings to the handedness, 40% fly ball rate to right-handed hitters as well. That could be pretty problematic in a hitter-friendly environment like Toronto. He did give up 5 homers in spring training in just 10 innings, but he did strike out 20 hitters. So lots of strikeout potential for him, especially against the Tigers lineup that is not very good against right-handed pitching either. 24% strikeout rate dating back to last season, but home runs probably going to be an issue for Shoemaker, who gave up 56% hard contact to right-handed hitters last season. Miguel Cabrera, Nick Castellanos, Heimer Candelario, 3 guys that I do have interest in here. You want to get the guys that hit sinkers really well because Shoemaker is a guy that does throw that sinker a significant amount, 33% of the time last season. Miguel Cabrera, 401 WOBA, 244 ISO against it. Castellanos, 380 WOBA, 184 ISO against it, but a 44% hard contact rating against that pitch. So Castellanos, a guy that I do have interest in here today. Outside of him, Candelario demolished sliders and splitters, and that's a pitch that Schumacher does get a decent amount of whiffs on, but Candelario, a guy to also keep an eye on. And Kristen Stewart actually homered yesterday. Interesting spot for Stewart, as well as a pretty cheap bat to get some exposure to. The Tiger side is a little bit more appealing than the Blue Jays side, but from a hitter standpoint, there's probably better places to look unless you're doing a bunch of lineups or just searching for value, because the Detroit Tigers, if you take a look at their price tags on like on DraftKings and on FanDuel, not terribly expensive. It's actually a spot where you can use some of these guys as value fillers. So again, focus mostly on the righties, guys that hits sinkers pretty well, whichever of those get in the lineup. But if you take a look at the projections, you'll see the majority of these of the Tigers batters project, especially like on FanDuel, over 3x value, which is pretty good. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Looking at the next game, Colorado at Miami, I do have to say Miami did surprise me a little bit yesterday. And I don't buy into it. They did get to Kyle Freeland a little bit. They did hit a couple of home runs, but with German Marquez and Trevor Richards taking the mound, this is not a place where I'm going for a lot of hitter exposure. I do think this is a better option or a better spot for pitchers. Marquez, one of the hottest pitchers last season, gets a great matchup. This Marlins team, if you take a look, not a whole lot of guys that really worry you. They post a 146 ISO, 312 WOBA, 25% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching last season. You do have Curtis Granderson, who did hit the ball pretty damn hard for a guy his age last season. There's not a whole lot of guys in this lineup that hit Marquez pitch mix very well, especially the curveball. He throws that curveball almost 25% of the time. And you only have JT Riddle, who has 62 batted ball events against that pitch that has a contact rate over 80% against curveballs. He has just a 219 WOBA against it. Marquez also has a pretty nasty fastball, throwing it about 46% of the time. It touches 95, 96 miles per hour. There's also not really a whole lot of guys in this lineup that hit that pitch very well. You have Lewis Brinson, who does a decent job hitting that pitch. You have Curtis Granderson, who posted a 375 WOBA, 297 ISO against it. But again, in a very, very positive pitching environment, this is a spot where I would rather use Marquez, who comes in off a season where he posted a 27.8% strikeout rate, 334 xFIP, 1.2 WHIP, and he played in Coors. His fastball command got really good. As the year went on, his slider command got really good. He can paint the edges really well with his pitches. His breaking balls should help him. Like the improvements he made with his breaking ball should really help him in this spot. So Marquez, a guy that is probably one of your better upper tier SP2 options. You're looking at again, Marquez, who is up there. Freddie Peralta, Flaherty, I'll get to here shortly. Eovaldi, I'll get to here shortly. Lucchesi is an interesting name to keep an eye on towards the bottom end, but in cash games, especially on DraftKings, if you can pair Garrett Cole with Marquez, you're probably going to be in line for a pretty solid outing, or a pretty solid night. So that's something to keep an eye on there. On the flip side of this game, you do have Trevor Richards, who was pretty damn good last season. 24% strikeout rates. He had a changeup that he threw a heck of a lot, 31% of the time, and it was ridiculous. 52.5% whiff rates outside of the zone with that changeup. He had a 24% strikeout rate, but 4.67 xFIP. He allowed a 392 WOBA, 203 ISO on his fastball. His fastball just does not get the job done. It is bad. But he can get swings and misses with the changeup. Again, he does throw it a significant amount of the time. He is a cheap arm to keep an eye on. We know the Colorado offense does tend to struggle outside of Coors Field. Again, this is a pretty hitter-friendly environment. There are a couple bats in this lineup that do hit changeups pretty well, but overall, I do think Trevor Richards is a pretty appealing tournament arm in the spot. Could notch a decent amount of strikeouts here. Outside of that, though, like if you're looking to get some exposure, Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, Daniel Murphy would be the names to keep an eye on. It is worth noting against right-handed hitters last season, Trevor Richards, 361 WOBA, 212 ISO. The guys that have had the most success against changeups, you have Daniel Murphy, 328 WOBA, 211 ISO, 83% contact rate. It's pretty solid. Trevor Story, 382 WOBA, 238 ISO, 65% contact rate. Not great, but he's probably the best bet for a home run if you're looking at someone from the Colorado side of this game. Looking at Houston and Tampa Bay, I promise we'll get to some appealing hitters here pretty soon. This is a game, Garrett Cole taking on Charlie Morton. Morton facing his former team. Interesting. Garrett Cole is obviously going to be the chalk SP1 on FanDuel, the chalk pitcher over on DraftKings, and for good reason. He is 11-2 over on DraftKings. That is a pretty attractive price tag for him there. He is also 11-3 over on FanDuel. FanDuel, it's just easy to take the high strikeout guy that's pretty good shot at a win, especially against a really bad offense, and just lock and load all day long. The Tampa Bay Rays, while they do have some guys that do hit right-handed pitching pretty damn hard, as a matter of fact, they do have 8 guys in that lineup, in the projected lineup, that posted a 36% or better hard contact rating against right-handed pitching. They do own a 172 ISO, 342 WOBA, and 24% strikeout rate against them last season. Cole, 12.4 strikeouts per 9 innings to go along with his 2.88 ERA, a low walk rate, allowed just 0.85 home runs per 9 innings to opponents. The strikeouts not going to last forever. The walk rates, all that stuff, it's not going to last forever. Garrett Cole is not going to be like a guy that's dropping 30, 40 fantasy points every single night. He is going to get shelled some nights. That being said, it's a spot where I don't see that happening here tonight against the Rays. There's not a whole lot of guys that have success in this Rays lineup against high velocity fastballs. Garrett Cole throwing his fastball about 50% of the time, 96.5 miles per hour is what it was hitting last season. It was touching 97, 98 in the spring. That's interesting, because if you pull up the numbers for the Rays against that pitch, you have Tommy Pham, Kevin Kiermaier, Joey Wendell are really the only guys with more than like 30 batted ball events against that pitch dating back to 2016. Wendell, 84% contact rate against it, 170 WOBA. Pham, 328 WOBA. against it, but only a 70% contact rate. I'm not worried about any of these guys going against him. If you're wanting to get contrarian and you're building like 150 lineups or 20 lineups or whatever, Tommy Pham, G-Man Choi, 256 ISO, 389 WOBA against right-handed pitching last season would be two guys to keep an eye on. And then Brandon Lau, 196 ISO, 348 WOBA, signed that big contract in the offseason. Wouldn't be a terrible bat to take in this spot. Looking at the other side with Charlie Morton, it is a tough spot to make his Rays debut, going up against the Astros, who just rocked Blake Snell yesterday. They just destroyed him. It's worth noting, he did Morton, 29.8% hard contact rating overall last season. That's really fucking good. He posted a 116 whip, 313 ERA, 28.9% strikeout rate last season. Kept the ball on the ground a decent amount. 48.9% ground ball rate. Threw his curveball about 29% of the time, generating like 46.7% whiffs. In a matchup like this, where again in a pitcher-friendly environment, I know the Astros hit a few homers yesterday and, again, got to Blake Snell, but this is a spot where Morton, 8,700 on DraftKings, is not a terrible tournament pitcher. I think there's better places to go, but he would be someone that I would probably sprinkle a little bit of exposure to. He's 8,500 over on FanDuel. Not a ton of strikeouts available to him in this lineup. If you take a look, the Astros against right-handed pitching last season, 177 ISO, 343 WOBA, only a 17.4% strikeout rate. So I don't know if there's going to be a lot of strikeouts there for him, but it's something to keep in mind if you're wanting to be super, super contrarian. If you're looking for bats against him, which I don't know if I would get too much exposure to the Astros outside of a full stack here. George Springer, Robinson Chirinos, Yulieski Gurriel, guys that posted a 200 ISO or better against curveballs. Alex Bregman did not have a ton of power against the pitch, 197 ISO, but a 395 WOBA, 84.6% contact rate against curveballs. Again, that's a pitch Morton throwing about 29% of the time. Didn't allow very much hard contact, only a 19% hard contact rating. So yeah, again, probably not a spot where we want to go overboard with bats here tonight. Looking at the Cardinals and the Brewers, there were some offense in this game yesterday. We do have Jack Flaherty taking on Freddie Peralta in this game. Two really, really electric young arms. Flaherty pitched really well in this matchup last season. Struck out 22 hitters, allowing 2 runs in 12 innings at Miller Park last season against the Brewers. Peralta, everyone probably remembers his 13 strikeout game against the Rockies at Coors Field last season. These guys, it's really tough. I think this is a tough spot for both of these guys. If you actually look at the projections, you will see that the Brewers actually the 5th highest projected stack on the slate. Christian Yelich, Lorenzo Cain, Travis Shaw, Ryan Braun, and Mike Moustakas are the guys projected to perform pretty well in this matchup. I guess let me talk about Jack Flaherty for a second before I get into the Brewers bats. Flaherty was outstanding for St. Louis last season. 3.34 ERA, 1.11 whip, 29.6% strikeout rates. He is a guy, again, I really like him as a young arm. There's some troubling spots if you dig into some of the numbers for him, but this is a spot I think he could have a little bit of a success. He has a devastating slider that generates a 23% swinging strike rate. He moved away from his sinker and four-seam fastball, which kind of led him to work on a splitter in the spring. From all accounts, the splitter was pretty good in the spring for him. There are going to be a lot of games where he doesn't pitch very deep because of his 10% walk rate, but the strikeouts are going to be there for most nights. The walks are the biggest issue, I think, for him. And the fact that his sinker and four-seam fastball are just not very good, also going to be a little bit of an issue. Like his four-seam fastball, he allowed 44% hard contact rating on it. And if you take a look, the xwOBA on his four-seam fastball from the left side of the plate at 347, 417 from the right side of the plate, a 263 ISO allowed on the four-seam fastball to right-handed hitters. I still like some of the bats here. I think Flaherty is fine in cash and in tournaments. Again, the walks are going to be the thing that could be an issue for him. If he gets in trouble with the walks, it's going to limit his upside, and putting anybody on base around Low Kane, Christian Yelich, Ryan Braun, Travis Shaw, Jesus Aguilar, any of these bats can be a little bit scary. Those bats that I did mention, they do have kind of an uphill battle against a guy like Flaherty. We want to look at guys that hit sliders. Ryan Braun, who posted a 344 wOBA, 232 ISO, is firmly in play because of his ability to hit that pitch. Ryan Braun, 187 ISO, 321 wOBA against sliders, or against right-handed pitching last season. Again, I did mention that four-seam, an issue for Flaherty to the right-hand side of the plate. Also that slider, a little bit of an issue for him as well. So Braun, an interesting right-handed bat to toss in your lineups here. Jesus Aguilar made contact with 55% of sliders thrown his way, which is not very good, but posted a 345 ISO against them. He was really good against right-handed pitching last season, 265 ISO, 373 wOBA against them. Christian Yelich from the left side of the plate, 281 ISO, 429 wOBA, posted a 505 xwOBA, 213 ISO, and 45% hard contact rate against sliders. And then Mike Moustakas, really, really underrated option here, 230 ISO, 343 wOBA against right-handed pitching last season, 350 wOBA, 318 ISO against sliders last season. And then you have Yasmani Grandal, 290 wOBA, but 223 ISO, 44% hard contact rating against sliders. Only made contact with about 61% of those pitches, but 242 ISO overall to right-handed pitching, 367 wOBA. Catcher's not a spot where I feel super comfortable with a lot of options most nights. Yasmani Grandal, always a great catching option on just about every single slate. Looking on the other side of this game, Freddie Peralta, again, the guy, we know he has strikeout upside. We know there's going to be games where he just comes in and just flat out dominates because he has that nasty fastball, generates a 25% whiff rate on it, was touching about 94 miles per hour in spring training. He was pretty good, 4.25 ERA last season, not very good, 4.46 xFIP, but a 29.9% strikeout rate, 1.14 whip, 41.4% hard contact allowed. A lot of hard contact from the left side of the plate. He allowed a 237 ISO, 378 wOBA, two left-handed hitters, and 44% hard contact rating to the left side. It's because he basically relies on his fastball and he doesn't have, a whole lot else. He relies on a very awkward, weird, deceptive delivery, and that's going to lead to him having some of these really bad games. If we take a look at his game log, you'll see what I'm talking about here. He's going to have a lot of really high strikeout games. 5 strikeouts in 4 innings against the Reds, but gave up 5 earned runs, stuff like that. He had this game against the Reds where he had 7 strikeouts, 0 earned runs in 7 innings. But if you just go through, look at since his debut last against Colorado last year, 13 strikeouts in that game. Then he had a 5 strikeout game with 4 earned runs against Minnesota, a 7 strikeout game with no earned runs, a 10 strikeout game with no earned runs, a 5 strikeout game with 3 earned runs, a 6 strikeout game with only 1, a 4 strikeout game with 3 earned runs, 7 strikeout game with 7 earned runs, 6 strikeout game, 1 earned, 8 strikeout game, 2 earned run, 3 strikeout game, 7 earned runs. Scrolling back up, a 5 strikeout game, 5 earned runs. As I wrote in the notes, two things are going to happen. He's either going to be electric and strike out a shit ton of batters, and everyone's going to be disappointed whenever they take Cardinals against him, or he's going to get absolutely shelled and everyone's going to hate themselves because they didn't take Cardinals against him. It's basically going to be one of those two outcomes. I am going to lean towards using some of these Cardinals here because I think this is a good spot to get some exposure to him. If you look at the guys that I highlighted in the notes, Matt Carpenter, 280 ISO, 398 WOBA, 23% strikeout rate to right-handed pitching last season. Dude was a hard contact monster last year. Against righties, he posted a 48.6% hard contact rating. I do love me some Matt Carpenter in the spot. Paul Goldschmidt, really, really strong option here as well. Grades out as one of the better plays on this slate. Marcell Ozuna is in a pretty solid spot. Paul DeJong, a guy that I think is really, really interesting at shortstop, 3,400 on DraftKings, 3,300 over on FanDuel. Colton Wong, 159 ISO, 333 WOBA against right-handed pitching last season. Doubled on Wong yesterday. I was really, really tilted whenever I saw him hit both of those home runs after I wrote him up. Because this was a spot where I had a ton of interest in him. If you actually dig into the hitting numbers against Peralta's four-seam fastball, Colton Wong, 394 WOBA, 212 ISO against that pitch dating back to last season, or dating back to 2016. So I think he's definitely interesting in this spot. Dexter Fowler, 384 WOBA, 241 ISO. I definitely like him as a value guy. Dexter Fowler is just never a guy that people talk about a whole lot. He's 3,600 over on DraftKings, but over on FanDuel, if you take a look at his price tag, it is just 2,400. It pays to get some a cheap outfield bat a lot of times, or some cheap options in your lineup. He's definitely someone we want to look at here. Going to speed this up a little bit. We do have just a couple more games to talk about. The Angels at Oakland. Matt Harvey taking on Marco Estrada. Whew. We got a barn burner here with these bats, or with these pitchers. Fly ball Estrada. He's been dealing with some, back and hip issues for a couple seasons now. He thinks he's over it. We'll have to wait and see. Did not look to be over it in that in his game overseas last week. Matt Harvey says he's healthy after a solid spring training. If you dig into some of the numbers, Matt Harvey actually towards the end of last season was not that bad. I highlighted a couple things in the notes about his pitch usage and some things that we saw late last season. His velocity went up to about 90, or his velocity in the spring was up to about 95 miles per hour. His curveball usage was really, really solid. His curveball and his changeup usage actually increased last season. I'm just going to throw this out there. I kind of dismissed Matt Harvey a little bit whenever I started breaking down this game, but it's a spot where Matt Harvey could be in play as like a tournament arm, and I'll dig into why here in just a second, but I want to get into the Angels side of this game first because they're my favorite stack of the day. Marco Estrada, 55.6% fly ball rating last season. Didn't allow a ton of hard contact, but he only had a 16.6% strikeout rate. That's not very good. This Angels lineup is pretty solid. You do have 163 ISO, 328 WOBA, just a 16% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching last season, and a lot of that's dragged down by the bottom of that lineup where you have David Fletcher, Peter Borges, Jonathan Lucroy, who just were not very good against right-handed pitching. If you get to the top of that lineup, you do have Cole Calhoun, who was not very good against right-handed pitching last season. But you have guys like Trout, Justin Bour, Albert Pujols, Andrelton Simmons, Zach Cozart, who actually are pretty good against right-handed pitching. Estrada, if you look back if you look at the 27-18 seasons combined, his numbers not great. If you look at 2018 also, or 2018, his numbers also not great. To left-handed hitters, he gave up a 321 WOBA, 233 ISO. To right-handed hitters, a 396 WOBA, 258 ISO. I like a lot of these guys here tonight. Mike Trout, a 338 ISO, 467 WOBA, 19% strikeout rate. To against right-handed pitching, you have Justin Bour, 221 ISO, 356 WOBA, 24% strikeout rate. Guys that hit Estrada's very low velocity fastball very, very well. If you take a look, Justin Bour, it's 18 batted ball events, 740 ISO, 600 ISO, 740 WOBA against the pitch for Justin Bour. If I'm calling my shot today with a home run, it's with Justin Bour. But Mike Trout, 602 WOBA, 569 ISO against it, 43 batted ball events dating back to 2016. Cole Calhoun, 346 WOBA, 88% contact rate. So there you have three guys that you can build around in your lineup. Zach Kozar, 584 WOBA, 636 ISO, 92% contact rate. My lineups today are going to be starting with Bour, Kozart for sure. I want to get Mike Trout and Cole Calhoun in there as well, and I think I can definitely make that happen with Garrett Cole and with Matt Boyd, who is my value plug of the day. I wouldn't completely overlook Jonathan Lucroy, Andrelton Simmons, other guys. Albert Pujols is going to be a very low-owned option here. Andrelton Simmons, 95% contact rate against that fastball, so that's something to definitely keep an eye on. And then if you look at Estrada, he did throw his changeup 37% of the time last season. Andrelton Simmons, a 323 WOBA, 82% contact rate against that pitch, so that's pretty solid. Jonathan Lucroy, 377 WOBA, 322 ISO against it. So there's a value catcher option if you're looking on DraftKings and you don't want to go with Grandal or one of the guys that I'm going to talk about here a little bit later. On the other side, again, I mentioned Matt Harvey. I mentioned the improvements he made late last season. I mentioned the increased velocity over the spring. I would still consider some of these A's bats against him. Harvey did really struggle against lefties all season long last year. 343 WOBA, 225 ISO allowed. That means the guys like Robbie Grossman, 107 ISO, 306 WOBA, 18% strikeout rate, is a decent value option here. I gotta find him, 3,500 over on DraftKings. That's pretty cheap against a guy that again did struggle against left-handed hitters last season, pulling up the Oakland price tags on FanDuel. Robbie Grossman, 2,300. So you have him, you have Dexter Fowler, decent value bats here. If you look at the pitch usage for Matt Harvey, I did focus mostly on the curve and the changeup because that was what he started to throw a little bit more last season. Jurickson Profar actually really good against curveballs last season. 282 ISO, but a 45% hard contact rating. That's pretty, or 282 WOBA, sorry, but a 352 xWOBA and a 45% hard contact rate against the pitch. Robbie Grossman didn't have very good numbers against it, but yeah, still. Harvey did struggle with this four-seam fastball, what he allowed on it, 47% hard contact rating, a 452 xWOBA. Looking at, that 94 to 95 mile an hour four-seam fastball. Chris Davis, 406 WOBA, 380 ISO against it. Didn't make a ton of contact, but still some decent numbers. Jurickson Profar, 381 WOBA, 200 ISO against it, 85% contact rate. So there you go. Jurickson Profar profiles pretty well against several of Harvey's pitches. You have Marcus Semien, 332 WOBA, 287 ISO against that fastball. So you have a couple of guys that are cheap in the spot that you can get exposure to. Ramon Laureano, 469 WOBA, 200 ISO. Very small sample size against that pitch. But he's another cheaper option that we can take a look at here. Outside of that, no one else really profiles to be a great option here. Looking at the next game, we do have Boston and Seattle. Nate Eovaldi taking on Yusei Kikuchi. Kikuchi is a very electric young arm. And if you do any research on him, you'll notice the same thing that I did, and that is Seattle is not going to pitch him deep in a lot of games. He went like 4.2 innings with 90 pitches against Oakland and um, Tokyo. The thing is, the Mariners are going to prioritize his long term health and transitioning him into the MLB role over anything else. The Mariners are not trying to win this season. They know they're not going to win a lot of games this season. They've already said that they're going to deploy him as an opener a lot of times this season. They're not going to tell us when that's going to be. They're not going to tell us when they're going to limit his innings. In tournaments, he is a perfectly fine arm because we did see last season that Boston did struggle a lot against left-handed pitching. They do have some guys in that lineup that do hit lefties pretty well, but overall, a 159 ISO, 333 WOBA, 22% strikeout rate against lefties last season. He's basically a guy who throws a fastball and a slider, and that's pretty much it. And there's not a whole lot to really look at whenever you're profiling these guys, because we don't have a lot of pitch data on Yusei Kikuchi. I will say, Mookie Betts, who had a 368 ISO, 496 WOBA, 13.5% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching last season, is always in play against those mid-range four-seam fastballs. Betts, 390 WOBA, 278 ISO, 94% contact rate. JD Martinez, 244 ISO, 410 WOBA. Always in play against left-handed pitching as well. He's a dude historically has posted just like video game numbers against left-handed pitching. He had a 485 WOBA, 425 ISO against those mid-range four-seam fastballs. Xander Bogaerts, 139 ISO, 363 WOBA. He had some pretty solid numbers against those mid-range fastballs as well. But unfortunately, I don't know if I can get behind Boston too terribly much outside of those three guys, really, given that there's just a lot of really good guys in really good spots. And historically, with what I saw last season out of Boston and experiences that I had, this lineup didn't change a whole heck of a lot. And there's just not a lot of guys in this lineup that have a ton of power or do very good against left-handed pitching. On the flip side of this game, you do have Seattle taking on Nate Eovaldi. This is another situation where Eovaldi does have upside, maybe not at his price tag. The issue with Eovaldi is that he's not going to pitch deep into this game. Have to give credit to the Red Sox last season. Part of the reason why Eovaldi turned things around is because the Red Sox and the Rays, for the most part, realized that Nate Eovaldi really, really struggles the third time through the order. His career ERA went from 338 to 381 the second time through the order, and then the third time through the order, a 606 ERA. Last season, if you look, the first time through the order, 291 ERA. Second time, 373 ERA. Third time, 458 ERA. This is a guy who is not going to see batters a third time a lot this season. Again, he is a strikeout guy, does have some strikeout upside. He throws just a nasty four-seam fastball that touches like 97, 98 miles an hour, has a decent cutter, decent job of getting, a ground ball rate. It's a 46%. He throws an arsenal of pitches like a four-seam fastball, slider, cutter, splitter, all over 10% of the time. It's not a spot where I want to attack too much. I was pretty impressed with the bats against Chris Sale yesterday, obviously. There are some guys, if you want to get some exposure here, Mitch Haniger, 219 ISO, 365 WOBA, 21% strikeout rate. And Edwin Encarnacion, 247 ISO, 356 WOBA, 24% strikeout rate. Both guys have excelled against cutters. Again, a pitch that Eovaldi throwing about 32% of the time. You have Mitch Haniger, 340 WOBA, 245 ISO against that pitch. You have Edwin Encarnacion, 320 ISO, 190 or 320 WOBA, 198 ISO. You have Domingo Santana, 157 ISO, 352 WOBA against right-handed pitching overall. He had a 373 WOBA, 148 ISO against cutters. Against those really high velocity four seam fastballs, again, Evaldi touching 97, 98 miles an hour most nights. Haniger, 335 WOBA, 203 ISO, 45% hard contact rating. That's pretty good. Ryan Healy, 355 WOBA, 169 ISO, 41% hard contact rate. Tim Beckham, 315 WOBA, 190 ISO against that pitch as well. Those would be the guys that I would look at the most. Even someone like Jay Bruce, if he gets in the lineup, 260 WOBA, 9.091 ISO against those high velocity fastballs. He struggled a lot last year, but if you pull his numbers dating back to 2017, 235 ISO, 358 WOBA against right-handed pitching, 40% hard contact rate. So he would be someone else that I would consider. Mariners probably not going to be a very popular stack here tonight, so that's something to definitely keep an eye on. Looking at the Padres and Giants, Derek Holland taking on Joey Lucchesi. An interesting pitching matchup from both sides. I'm still very high on the Padres. Kind of let me down last game. Derek Holland, I don't think people are realizing how good he was late last season. 287 ERA, 127 whip, 25% strikeout rate late in the season last year. He stood in a different place on the mound. He slid over a little bit closer to the first base line. That helped him drive up his swinging strike rate on his fastball and his breaking balls. He gets a tough matchup against the Padres team, but this lineup has a lot of young guys that are probably going to strike out a decent amount. You have Kinsler and Machado anchoring the lineup with low strikeout rates, 11.1% for Kinsler, Machado 8.4%. You have Austin Hedges with a 33% strikeout rate. You have Manuel Margot with a 20% strikeout rate. You have Hosmer with an 18% strikeout rate. Franmil Reyes with a 26% strikeout rate. Will Myers a 25% strikeout rate. I realize it's never appealing to look at Derek Holland, but as another cheap guy that you might want to get some exposure to, he wouldn't be a terrible arm to look at here. Hasn't had a lot of success against the Padres in his career. Looking at it, 6.23 ERA in 6 starts versus San Diego, for what that's worth. But again, if you're looking to build a bunch of lineups, he's going to be contrarian, very, very contrarian. If you're looking at guys against him, Manny Machado, 244 ISO, 384 WOBA, 17% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching. Franmil Reyes, 202 ISO, 326 WOBA, 29% strikeout rate in the heart of that lineup. Young guys that we can definitely look at. They're not expensive. Franmil Reyes, 4,200. Machado is 4,900. But even someone like Fernando Tatis, 3,900 over on DraftKings, that's pretty appealing. I have to even look and see if he should be in the FanDuel player pool, but carrying over from my hatred for FanDuel from NBA to MLB, he is. He's 3K. Austin Hedges, catcher, not a spot where I feel great with most nights. 3,600 on DraftKings, 2K over on FanDuel. He has some appeal in this spot. 293 WOBA against left-handed pitching. That's not very good. But he's just another guy. Like this lineup, we know Hedges is a guy that can get hot from time to time. And if you look, you're looking for guys that hit sinkers pretty well, because that's what Holland throws a lot. 57% of his pitches last season were sinkers. Hedges, 330 WOBA, 341 xWOBA, 32% hard contact rate. So that's pretty good. You have Machado, 358 WOBA against sinkers, 37% hard contact rating. Franmil Reyes, 461 WOBA, 41% hard contact rating. So those are the guys that I highlighted the most in the notes. But Ian Kinsler, really, really solid in that leadoff spot. 369 WOBA, 41% hard contact rating against sinkers last season. Even Will Myers, 354 WOBA, someone that we should be looking at here tonight. On the flip side, you have Joey Lucchesi coming off a solid rookie year, 26.5% strikeout rate, 1.29 whip, struggled with a little bit of a 4.08 ERA, but he had a 3.45 xFIP, so I do expect that to come down a little bit. 1.59 home runs per 9 allowed. Strikeout stuff is there, that's for sure. He has the potential in this matchup to be a really good value option. This Giants team, their current projected starting lineup, 131 ISO, 306 WOBA, but just a 14% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching. For what it's worth, those numbers dating back to last season, I don't put a lot of weight in because you have Duggar, who only had 46% or 46 plate appearances. You have Connor Joe, who doesn't have any stats from last year. You have Joe Panic, who has a 4.2% strikeout rate and 120 plate appearances. You have Michael Reed, who had like 2 plate appearances against left-handed pitching last season. You have a lot of these guys that no one's ever heard of, probably shouldn't be in the majors, but you just have a lot of guys that don't have a lot of success against right-handed pitching overall. So Lucchesi, he's very, very interesting. He's working on a new pitch, a cutter. He has that ridiculous curveball that generated 42% whiffs last season. He did struggle against right-handed pitching at 340 or right-handed hitters, a 343 WOBA, 230 ISO allowed. So like Evan Longoria, 206 ISO, 314 WOBA against lefties last season. This is worth taking a look at. Buster Posey, 369 WOBA against left-handed pitching last season, would be the 2 guys that I would look at the most here. All right, on to the last game. Almost done. Sorry, this is still taking forever because I'm still not used to talking about baseball by myself. We do have Ross Stripling and Robbie Ray taking the mound against each other. Dodgers setting was opening day record or tying an opening day record with 8 home runs yesterday. Kind of pisses me off because I had interest in the Dodgers whenever I was writing up the slate, and then like I'm checking my phone every 5 seconds because I'm getting home run alerts because, well, the Dodgers are just going bonkers. Robbie Ray, interesting guy here, 10-1 over on DraftKings. He's pricey. What is he over on FanDuel? Not projected very well. That's what he is. 8,400 on FanDuel. That's really, really appealing just because he's a guy with a ton of strikeout potential. We saw it last year. Dude can strike some hitters out. That's for damn sure. 31.3% strikeout rate. The biggest problem he had, walks were a huge issue. 14.7% walk rate, 13.5% home run to fly ball rate across his final 13 starts last season, 42% hard contact rating. This Dodgers team, there's a lot of bats in this lineup that just rake against left-handed pitching, but a 22.3% strikeout rate. We also saw last season. We've seen it for the last 2 seasons. These Dodgers, they have a lot of power. They have a lot of good bats, but they just kind of go through these stretches where they get really, really hot and then they just cool off really, really quickly. Again, Robbie Ray, a tournament-only arm. We've already talked about several guys that I feel more comfortable with in cash games, and I'm going to be looking at some of these Dodger bats here. The first guy that really, really jumps off the page, Justin Turner, 244 ISO, 442 WOBA, 13.8% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching. He's 4,200 over on DraftKings. He is... I got to get better about having my FanDuel pricing up. He is 4,100 over on FanDuel. He is my top play of the day overall, period. He absolutely raked against left-handed pitching. Against Robbie's high-velocity fastball, it's a fastball that he throws 53% of the time, touches about 93, 94 miles an hour. Justin Turner, 420 WOBA, 294 ISO, 89% contact rate. Yeah, Justin Turner in a great spot here. He's one of my home run picks for the day. AJ Pollock in a really good spot, 243 ISO, 314 WOBA, 21.9% strikeout rate. Last season, Max, he's going to regress one of these days, but it's never actually going to happen because he's a better hitter than everyone thinks, and his regression just doesn't automatically happen because you want it to. Muncy posted a 275 ISO, 387 WOBA, but a 30.3% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching last season. Hitting behind Turner, and both of those guys really good numbers against that fastball as well. AJ Pollock, 480 WOBA, 423 ISO, 45.4% hard contact rating, 92% 45.45% hard contact rating, and a 91.67% contact rating against that pitch. Max Muncy, 483 WOBA, or 278 ISO, 40% hard contact rating, 83% overall contact against that pitch. Then you have Enrique Hernandez is what I'm calling him. 425 WOBA, 293 ISO, 39% hard contact rating, and an 85% overall contact rating against that pitch. Austin Barnes, 411 WOBA, 182 ISO, 92% contact rating against the pitch. Barnes coming out of spring training looking really, really solid. You have Chris Taylor, who's a pretty solid option here. You have Cody Bellinger, who is a pretty solid option here. This entire Dodgers lineup is in play. Everybody in that lineup is going to be someone to look at here. I would focus on the middle: Turner, Pollock, Muncy, Hernandez, but again, catcher, not a spot where I feel great. So Austin Barnes does fit that bill for me there at 3,200 over on DraftKings. Almost skipped over the Rays and Ross Stripling. Whoops. Stripling, interesting name, I think, to keep an eye on here. Coming off a pretty solid year last year. Turned things around after he figured out he was tipping his pitches. Posted a 27% strikeout rate, 45.4% ground ball rate, 11.5% swinging strike rate. Had a decent curveball. 36.5% whiff rate on his curveball. Gets a matchup against an Arizona team that posted a 182 ISO, 320 WOBA, 20% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. And actually, it looks like the projected lineup changed since I wrote that. 160 ISO, 309 WOBA, 21.2% strikeout rate. So even worse. There are a couple guys in the lineup. Eduardo Escobar, 255 ISO, 359 WOBA, 21.4% strikeout rate. David Peralta, 251 ISO, 402 WOBA. That he's going to have to get around. Jake Lamb, who has generally been a pretty good batter against right-handed pitching. We'll have to get around him as well. A couple of low strikeout bats in that lineup. Christian Walker, David Peralta, two guys that have some success against sliders. Stripling, throwing that slider 26.8% of the time. You'll notice I've talked a lot about guys that throw that slider. That's a pitch that a lot of these young guys are developing a lot more because it's just really hard for some of these hitters to hit. You have guys in this lineup. And the only two guys that have any success against it: David Peralta, 349 WOBA, 258 ISO, but a 66% contact rate. Christian Walker, who may not even get in the lineup, he has a little bit of success in it against it. But all these guys: Jarrod Dyson, 26% whiff rate; Eduardo Escobar, 28% whiff rate; Adam Jones, David Peralta, Jake Lamb, Nick Ahmed, all guys with over 30% whiff rates against it. And then you have Alex Avila, 55% whiff rate against sliders. He also has a 40% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. So there's some strikeouts in this lineup for Ross Stripling as well. So if I'm looking at pitcher construction from a cash game perspective, it's going to be Garrett Cole, Ross Stripling, German Marquez, and probably Lucchesi and Matt Boyd that I'm looking at the most from cash game pitchers. I focus mostly on that because there are a lot of you guys that are new to MLB that are just cash game guys. There's a lot of arms on the slate that I would feel comfortable with in tournaments, but from a cash game perspective, again, it's mostly Garrett Cole, Stripling, German Marquez, Matt Boyd, maybe some Lucchesi. But good luck in all your contests tonight. Again, I won't be doing podcasts on the weekends. Do have to take a little bit of time to recover, but I will be back on Monday for another fantastic MLB slate.